I'm Chris Ponte, and I am very pleased to have Karen Hudes on. Karen traveled today during a threat of a blizzard to come up to Connecticut from Washington, D.C. to tell us her story. First off, Karen, thank you very much for making this effort.
Chris, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. First off, you're back in Connecticut. It's kind of old home week for you, isn't it?
It most certainly is. I was at Yale Law School in New Haven, Connecticut, and loved every minute of it. And the first thing I did last night was I went to Sally's.
Right. Oh, a little pizza.
That's right.
Wonderful. Now, for those of you that don't know Karen, she has an incredible background and an incredible story to tell. Let's first talk about your background in law.
My background in law is that I went to Yale Law School and graduated in 1976. But just before that, I had gone to Holland and studied development economics at the University of Amsterdam. The reason I did that was this was right at the time of the Vietnam War, and they were saying love it or leave it. And I was very upset about what was going on with Vietnam. And so I went to the University of Amsterdam and I studied economics there. And I have been working together with all of the countries of the world, including Holland. I've had a very special, close relationship with Holland. So that's my background.
You know, it was interesting because the older I get, the more and more I learned about the ways of the world. And Vietnam was one of those situations where not only were we in a quagmire, but essentially we sent 50,000 people to die for absolutely no reason. There was nothing to gain from there now, wasn't there? There was nothing to gain.
Well, the people of Vietnam are actually extremely adept. Look at what they did during that war. They held on, and they have prevailed. And I actually had a chance inside the World Bank to work on Vietnam. I've worked on a number of countries. I worked on Nigeria. I worked on Yemen. I worked on Jordan. I worked on the Philippines. And every country that I've had the privilege of working, when I say I worked on, I just simply would go there and I would say to all of the countries, if we can help, tell us how. And I would then do everything I could to see whether there was a project that would make sense for that country. But the World Bank actually has a mixed record. There are many projects where there's no ownership. But one of the things that I learned in the process of, I was in the World Bank legal department for 20 years. One of the things that I learned was how to take direction from people and how to convince them that I had no agenda but their agenda, and to be believable in that. And so during the 20-year period, and working on all of those different countries, I got to know the executive directors at the World Bank, and they got to know me as somebody who was there to do their job as a lawyer at the World Bank, and that I didn't have my own agenda at all. And so as this story progresses, and you can see over the timeline, because I've testified in the European Parliament, I've testified about the corruption that I've been reporting in the UK Parliament. And when that happened, there was a very accurate political science modeling tool that said that all of the corruption that I and the other whistleblowers at the World Bank were reporting, that this corruption would end, that all of the countries of the world would join together to fight the corruption. And that's what the story really is. It's a story about people joining together to fight corruption.
Okay, let's now talk about that journey. You're at the World Bank, and what did you uncover? Was it one large layer of corruption and then many, let's say, minor situations, or did the one bit of undoing lead to a lot of areas that you said, hey, this is just isn't right?
Well, before I went to the World Bank, I got the operation manual of the World Bank from a lawyer who had been there in 1944 when the treaty for the World Bank was negotiated. His name was Aaron Brochus. He was a Dutch lawyer. And he was 80 when I got to know him. He told me that when Robert McNamara came to the World Bank as its president, that was in 1968, and McNamara stayed there for 10 years, that's when the World Bank started to go really corrupt. And the thing about the legal department is it's right in the very heart of the World Bank, because there's the board, which consists of, now it's 25. In the beginning, it was 12 members of the board. They represent countries. And the 8 largest countries each have their own individual executive director, and the other countries are in groups. And so what I learned from Aaron Brachis was that when somebody from the Pentagon comes to the World Bank as the World Bank president, that there's no rule of law. And so when Paul Wolfowitz came to the World Bank, I knew that we were in for some very difficult, heavy sledding. So that's really.
And what did you observe?
It's been fascinating, because the layers of corruption, it's like an onion. It just kept getting deeper and deeper. So at the very beginning, I probably never would have started out on this journey if I had known how deep the corruption went. At the time, I told you that this political science modeling tool came to the World Bank, and it predicted that we could turn the situation around, that there would be rule of law. But it turned out that model was used on the world at large. And since the World Bank is like a microcosm, it's a model of the world, the corruption that I was dealing with inside the World Bank was actually world corruption. And so when I was fired illegally in 2007, and by the way, Senator Lugar wrote 3 letters to the World Bank saying, don't fire this lady. What I found out at the beginning of the journey was I was doing my job as a lawyer inside the World Bank, but I knew that there was a problem because there was Paul Wolfowitz there.
Right.
So I wasn't totally surprised, but it's been a very long journey. But I can tell you, and I can tell everybody listening to this video, that the chances that this corruption ends is 90 to 95%, because it thrives in secrecy. And you're watching me now. It's not secret anymore.
What is going on right now with our Federal Reserve note?
What is going on right now is that paper currency never works. It always crashes. And we are just at the moment that we have the time to convert that to treasury dollars. And this is exactly what Ronald Reagan was trying to do when he did a study, and he found out that 100% of our income taxes are leaving the country and going to the bankers. That's what John F. Kennedy was doing. And John F. Kennedy, he had accessed the wealth of the world and the gold that we're supposed to have. The Federal Reserve does not have the gold that the United States is supposed to have backing its dollar. That gold is there, but it's not going to be backing the Federal Reserve note. And so we have got to transition very quickly to the real currency in the United States. And Ronald Reagan printed that currency. It's there waiting for us. And we just simply have to exchange it, very simply. And we will not have any economic dislocation. Otherwise, you better believe this country is not going to have any more military might. If we stay with the Federal Reserve note, we will have lost our standing completely. As it is right now, the Federal Reserve note is no longer what's called international reserve currency. That means that the countries are using other currency in their international trade. The BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, that's 25% of trade. They're not using the dollars with their own trade. And 133 developing countries, that's the group of 77, they've announced that they're not going to be using dollars in their international trade. Now, one of the things, getting back to what I was doing at Yale Law School, between my junior and senior year, I wrote a paper on how that coalition of the developing countries, called the G77, was developing. I went to the UN between my junior and senior year at Yale, and I wrote a 200-page paper on that. I think that was also one of the reasons I was brought to the World Bank by Ibrahim Shihada. He was an Egyptian lawyer who had been the general counsel of OPEC, That's the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And he might have realized that, that I was somebody who was very interested in the real mission of the World Bank. Now, the World Bank has been hijacked. It's been hijacked by a group that is called the Network of Global Corporate Control. It is a group that was studied by 3 mathematicians at the Federal Institute of Technology, and they found out that this group controls 40% of the assets of the 43,000 companies on the capital markets. And what it does is it takes the same directors and puts them on interlocking boards. So they have 10 times their economic might. And they didn't think anybody was going to find out about them, but we did. And this group has come into the World Bank, and it's also come into the United States, and it's done something called state capture. It is buying off the politicians. What they do is they print dollars, and they spend them to buy the politicians. They get to keep the difference between the amount that it costs to print the dollars and the face amount of the dollar. And then, to add insult to injury, they charge us interest on country debt. That's called usury. That means that people are working 3 months out of the year to pay the bankers on a scam. They have no right to keep that seniorage, and any president that tried to end that scam, that's what happened to Abraham Lincoln. That's why he was shot. So any president that tried to end that scam was sent off. And people have said, well, Karen, if they can get rid of presidents, how come you're still around? And the reason is, first of all, because I have just been following the rule of law. It wasn't very easy to get rid of me. And frankly, the problem isn't something that I've invented. It's a real problem. So if you get rid of me, you haven't gotten rid of the problem. You have just exposed the problem. And they were trying to cover it up. So it wasn't going to help them.
Is it safe to say that those who stand behind all of the central banks are from the same group?
That is very safe to say, yes. But it's more than the Bank for International Settlements. The BIS was created in 1930 for war reparations for Germany. But in the meantime, that group didn't just come on the scene suddenly. They're in front of something which has been going on for centuries. If you go back and read what was going on in the Middle Ages, when we had a Dark Ages, we are right now at the same point that we were in 400, which is when we went into the Dark Ages, because their currency failed. But we're at a point that that doesn't have to happen. And as a matter of fact, the chance that it doesn't happen is 90 to 95%, because we know what's going on, and we're not going to let it happen.
Tell my viewers what the Federal Reserve is, how they came into this country in one of the worst dastardly acts in the history of our country.
That was in 1913. What they did was they had a secret meeting. Griffin wrote a book on this, and they waited until most of the members of Congress had gone home at Christmas time, and then they passed this legislation. And by the way, the Federal Reserve note is unconstitutional.
Correct. And what Kennedy tried to do and what Reagan tried to do was to essentially uphold the Constitution, which said what? That Congress would coin our money, correct? So there would be some accountability to the money. Am I right?
Yes, but it wasn't just up to Congress. The states could also issue currency in silver and gold. That was something that they were entitled to do.
So Connecticut could have its own currency. New York could have had its own currency.
Some of the states are now recognizing precious metals as currency. I believe 5 of them are doing this.
Wow. So in 5 states, you could go in to a store and have silver or gold and you can purchase things?
I think the way they're doing it is they're actually minting the currency in precious metals in those countries. But yes, I don't think you go into the store as much. But one of the things that I've learned, if you're trying to use gold coins, that's worth a lot of money. It's how are you going to buy your groceries with currency like that? It turns out that you can press gold very, very thin and put it in a plastic envelope and have the amount of gold equal to the face amount of that currency. And so that's what countries are actually poised to do, to issue real currency, real valuable currency, where you don't have interest charged.
We have a situation in this world where I don't know how many fiat currencies there are, but essentially they're only really worth the paper that they're printed on without the backing of silver or gold, correct?
Yes and no, because don't forget that if countries are responsible for repaying the debt, you've got the labor of the whole citizenry of that country. And what the bankers have done is they've taken the birth certificates of babies and they've estimated how many taxes those babies are going to be paying for in their lifetime. And they've taken that birth certificate and they've floated it on the capital markets and earned money on it.
So they took a shot at how much money they thought I would make in my lifetime because I had a social security number, right? And they basically rolled the dice on a capital market and made money off it. Is that what you're telling me?
A
That's
lot of money, that's right.
of every citizen that had a social security number.
It gets much worse. Yes, not only that, but if you two citizens are married by a justice of the peace, they're not actually married. Because the person that the justice of peace is marrying is somebody with capital letters.
The straw man.
That's right. That's right. And without bothering to tell people, and what I just found out a month ago, and this, as a lawyer, was something which was, it shocked me to my very foundations. What I found out is that the courts that we are going to are not real courts. What the bankers have done is when you go to a bank and you sign your signature card, there's little fine print underneath that says subject to the bank rules. And if you read the bank rules, inside is a waiver of your right to a real court. You have waived your right to a real court. I found this out from, there's a fellow named George Mercier, who used to be the clerk of the courts in New York, and he wrote a paper called Invisible Contracts. So what I did, I sued the World Bank. I bought a World Bank bond, which meant that I was allowed to sue the World Bank, and I sued the World Bank because its financial statements are incorrect. I knew this because as a lawyer inside the World Bank, when I tried to correct a project that was where the board was being lied to, it was a cover-up, and I tried to correct that, I was punished, and the board was never told that they were lied to. Now that means that the internal controls are lacking. Any accountant that tries to correct the financial statements is going to be fired because there's no recourse as an employee. You're not allowed to sue the World Bank. What you're allowed to do is you're allowed to go to an internal tribunal called the Administrative Tribunal. The judges on that tribunal are actually awarded arbitration contracts by another branch of the World Bank called MIGA, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, and also ICSID, the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes. They're given very, very lucrative arbitration contracts. So when you're an employee who's trying to correct the records inside the World Bank that are incorrect, you go to a kangaroo court. And so, but because I was a lawyer inside the World Bank, I knew if I bought a World Bank bond, I could sue the World Bank in the real courts. And that's what I did. And I also sued the World Bank's accounting firm, KPMG. And then I went to all of the regulatory agencies. And I went to all the attorneys general because they were required to protect their citizenry from inaccurate financial statements of an issuer on the capital markets. So I used all the securities laws. And very strange things happened with that case. And finally, all of the executive directors and the board of governors, that's the 188 member countries, settled my lawsuit, and the court refused to recognize the settlement. Now I was astonished. How could that happen? That was in 2012. And so it was kind of like a mystery novel to find out how this could have happened. And now I found out what it is those are not real judges. They're not real courts. And what I did was I went and I spoke to the clerk of the court, and I told them about this study that George Mercier had written about the invisible contracts. And I said, how are we going to get this straightened out? And the clerk said, I'd like you to file another document in the court. So I did. Actually, I filed it in the district court and also in the Court of Appeals. And I found out on the 5th of January that the judge, Judge Boasberg, had written a memorandum opinion ignoring the issue that I had raised. Now that's fraud.
Absolutely.
So I went back to the court.
Absolutely.
I went to the chief judge in the district court, Judge Roberts, and I asked him what he was going to do to correct that situation. And he said, well, I'm not going to do anything. So I then tried to figure out what could I do. Well, these judges that are not sitting in real courts have security bonds issued by insurance companies, surety bonds. So I went back to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I asked them to tell me who the insurance company was so I could file for damages.
Wow.
Yes?
Yes. That cover these judges, is what you're saying.
That's where
They're
we are.
covered. Oh, that's where we are right now.
Well, they haven't told me who the insurance company is, but I did talk to the Association of Insurance Companies, and I found out that there are 400 insurance companies that are issuing these surety bonds. So that's where we.
So this is wonderful justice that we have in this country, isn't it? It's just it is a circus. It is a three-ring circus, and this woman has taken the reins to uncover all of these things that have been going on for many, many years. Here we talk about the Federal Reserve, okay? We talk about what really happened to John F. Kennedy, what really happened to Ronald Reagan, what happened to Abraham Lincoln. You know what they tried to do? They tried to return the currency to the power of the people, which leads me to my next question. Look into that camera. And for those people who feel that we are a representative republic, tell them what's really going on with our congressmen and our senators.
Well, you see, the people that gave us our Constitution knew exactly what we were up against, and so they put a hidden trapdoor in the Constitution called Article 5, and that provides that when 2/3 of the state legislatures require there to be a constitutional convention, there has to be one. And more than 2/3 of the state legislatures have asked for the Constitutional Convention. I went to the meeting of the state legislators that was held by the National Association of State Legislatures, and we discussed this issue. One of the other issues that we discussed was the United States credit rating, because if we have all these hidden trapdoors and we don't have real courts, how can we be a country with a good standing as a country that can be relied on to repay our obligations? So,
Well, what's the reality? You just told me before we went on you had some updated information of what our credit rating actually is in the world.
yes, because the credit rating agencies, I have been in touch with all of them as this saga has played out, and they know that the citizenry of the United States is taking back our republic, and what's happened to our real Constitution is it's been put on the back burner. In 1871, the banks came in, and that's when they carved out the District of Columbia, and they said that there was actually a company that was the United States of America, and the federal employees were actually employees of that company, not civil servants. So
Correct.
when we take back our Constitution, which we can do using Article 5, I just finished writing a message to some of the people that have been following me on Twitter, and I said that we were in an interregnum. That's a situation where you don't have a legitimate government. Our legitimate government is the government that we the people, because that's what's in our Constitution. It begins up with we the people. We're
Correct.
allowed to take away our consent to the government and fix it. And that's what we have done. When our state legislatures said that they wanted a constitution, an amendment,
Correct.
and more than 2/3 of them said this, that was when the Congress was required to convene a constitutional convention. So right now, our government is not a legal government. We the people, are the ones that are in control. We, the people, are the ones that can straighten things up. And if, in case people are wondering, what do we do, how to get from here to there, they don't have to worry, because the founders knew that we had this difficult situation, that we would be in a period of transition, and that's why they created the states. And the banks knew that the states would be something that they had to worry about. So you know what they did? They created something called Metro 1313. They created agencies that would undermine the states. So we've gone back to the county level. And they've also created an agency that was going to undermine the counties. But there's another agency called the County Executives of America. Those are the ones where there's 700 counties where the counties, the citizens in the counties, elect an executive. And that agency is the one that we've been dealing with in this period where we don't have a legitimate government.
You know, it's interesting because we often think of being overtaken as what happened on 9/11 or what happened in Vietnam or Korea. But something very important happened in 1871, a state of emergency. Does that state of emergency still exist?
Yes, because the U.S. Congress has been extending it secretly behind closed doors without bothering to tell us.
And what is the implication of having a state of emergency?
That's how, for example, in the internet, when you send an email and it doesn't arrive, it's gone into a hidden labyrinth somewhere and been intercepted. That's not legal, but it's happening anyway. It's happening because of that state of emergency.
So your rights are suspended during a state of emergency. Is it safe for me to say that individual people's, the rights that we think we have, is suspended during a state of emergency time?
Not only that, but when you go to these kangaroo courts and you ask to have your constitutional rights recognized, that judge is actually not required to do that because you've secretly, without knowing it, waived your right to that court of equity where you could have stood there as a human being and asserted your rights. Because when you go into these kangaroo courts, you're actually going there not as an individual. They see you as the corporation that they created when they took your birth certificate and pledged it on the capital markets. So there's all this secret, some lawyers call it gobbledygook. Many lawyers, if you ask them about this, they can't believe it. And frankly, when I first heard about it, it sounded so improbable that I just dismissed it out of hand. It's just that because I had to keep getting confronted with it because people were telling me about it, I had to go into the studying the documents. And there are actually, in the 1990s in South Carolina, a study group went back and looked at their state house records, their governor's records. And I have the transcript of that study group. Yes, all of this happened. This is our actual legal situation.
To reset the situation, I'm Chris Ponte. She's Karen Hudes, just dropping some bombshell information on me and for those that are watching. All right, let me throw this at you because I know there are people out there sitting and wondering. How have they been able to keep all this information secret?
Well, the biggest culprit is the press.
It's bought and sold?
Yes, and the only way people have been finding out about me is because of the internet.
Correct.
And many people on the internet are also bought and sold, and they're just there to create confusion. But that's how, because there's a whole big infrastructure. Just think, if you're a central bank and you can print money and you can pay all the politicians you want with the money that you've printed, and you can buy all the companies you want with the money you've printed, and also charged interest to people to repay you. There's a lot you can get away with. But the fact of the matter is, you can fool some of the people all of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. And that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with people who have been working together, and it's like doing a big jigsaw puzzle. And we're never 100% sure that we've got the story straight. We're always trying to find out what the actual reality is. But one of the hard things is when people who are just hearing about this for the first time, it's just it's mind-boggling, and they're just they're at a loss. And the best thing to say is that there are people that have been working on this puzzle for very, very, very long, and they're there to help show you their documentation. And what I've been doing is I've just been piggybacking on all of these people's efforts. And sometimes I get it wrong because you're deliberately given false information. But what I then say is this is a work in progress. And in terms of taking back our republic and our real constitution, that's also going to be a work in progress. And the only thing that I'm going to be doing with that, because the World Bank, because it's had also this very difficult history, because it was hijacked by this same group that we're talking about, this network of global corporate control, we have to be very, very careful not to intervene in anybody's country or anybody's government. We have got to be just there to provide clean currency and let the people in those countries themselves figure out what it is they want to do. If they want to keep their government the way it is, that should be their right. Yeah, okay. We should not be involved in anybody's government. And so the role that I think the World Bank has to play is just simply replace these paper currencies where the banks are charging usury interest on country debt, just exchange that for what I was talking about, this currency that's actually gold there. Mm-hmm. And people also say, well, what about other commodities? Why is gold so special? And the point is, yes, we should get rid of legal tender laws. Those are laws where you're the one that tells somebody what currency they should use. And we should allow people to decide what currencies they want to use. And actually, the most important currency is something called local currency. That's in a small area where the people, the businesses in that area, decide that they want to have their own local currency. And that gives people fresh food from the local farmers. It's kind of like a local barter system. That should be in every single local jurisdiction as well.
People have worked their entire lives to have a financial future, to have a retirement, whether it be 401k and whatnot. And our whole life we've heard this phrase, member FDIC, that was going to provide the insurance necessary to protect our assets. Have we been hoodwinked?
The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, if it had to pay out on the kinds of claims that would happen if we do not get our Federal Reserve note replaced, it's not going to pay those bills.
I heard as little as it only really covers 7% of your deposits. Is that
well? The way it's supposed to work, it says that if you're a small depositor, which is to say that your deposit is less than $100,000, and I think they recently raised this to $200,000, that you would be covered 100%. But that's only if the FDIC has enough money to go around to pay all of the people who are going to have to be compensated if the banks were to fail. And the other problem is that the banks are now coming up with agreements about what they call bail-ins,
right?
Which is what they did in Greece.
That's right.
Where they required the depositors to contribute to the workout. That means that when you put money in the bank, instead of that bank watching your money and being careful with it, they're gambling with that money. They're on the derivatives. The separation between banking and investment was broken, and they haven't put that back together again. So, but I'm not trying to alarm people because, again, what I was saying is that enough people understand about this corruption where the bankers are printing paper currency like there's no tomorrow. And that just, the way you know that this is wrong is if you look at what the currency actually purchases. If you look at what a dollar would buy in 1913, when the dollars were, Federal Reserve notes were issued, compared to what you can buy with a dollar now, it's lost 99% of its value. And when that happens, who's going to be profiting from that? It's the bankers who are keeping the difference between what your currency used to be worth and what it's now worth. They're taking your property away from you every time that piece of paper loses its value. And paper currency always fails, always.
What was the thinking behind the quantitative easing program?
Well, first of all, you have to look at the words quantitative easing. That's just gobbledygook. That's a phrase that sounds somehow, well, do I understand what they're saying? And that's actually what's been going on in all of this corruption that I'm talking about. They come up with words that make people confused and make them feel that, well, I'll just leave it to the experts. The lawyers are very good at that, and so are the accountants. They come up with a very complex situation with very complicated words, and the whole thing about the legal profession, actually, the American Bar Association, that is also a scam. That's a scam because you shouldn't have to leave it up to somebody else to do your business, that you can't figure out what it is that's happening to you, that you're not allowed to represent yourself. That's done simply to make people think that, oh, well, the experts are probably doing it right. I think I'll just leave it to the experts. You know how many times people say, leave it to the experts? If you don't listen to anything I'm saying and you just take one thing away from what I'm saying, it's don't listen to the experts.
No, you almost, it's the same thing I've learned recently about health and the MD system. The MD system and the pharmaceuticals and the FDA is there to protect them, not to make you healthy, because they suppress so much information regarding your health. And from what I'm hearing you say, there's so much misinformation out there, wrong information about who the Federal Reserve really is, what their interest is. Do they really want to grow our economy? I would have to say they have no interest in Mr. and Mrs. Joe USA.
Well, they actually have a great deal of interest. If you had a cattle ranch, you would be very interested in your cattle.
But they don't want me to expand my wealth because it seems like, taxes seems to be very tyrannical to me. And it's impossible for a small businessman to become a large business today with all the different taxes and whatnot. I don't know. I don't get the feeling that the banking system really wants to produce a lot of people's wealth based on the capitalist system that we think that we're under.
That's exactly right. They're not doing what the real banking system is supposed to be doing, which is taking the deposits and using them productively and cautiously.
Correct.
And guarding them, safeguarding them. No, that's not what they're doing.
Look into that camera as we close. Talk to my audience and tell them what the situation is right now, what you're efforting, and what every citizen should try to do to protect their assets.
I'm happy to say that things are not as dire as they seem, because although the corruption that we're talking about is there, it's not there in secret anymore. We know about it, and the minute that happens, it can't continue. And the other good news is that the county executives of America are aware of this corruption, and they have actually accepted the wealth that the United States citizens are entitled to. And all of the other countries in the world know about their wealth that they're entitled to. So the bankers, to sum it up, the bankers thought that we were too stupid to know how rich we really are, and they're the ones that were too stupid to see us coming.
Who do we appeal to? If what you're saying is true, and the United States is just a corporation and our Congress people are just managers of that corporation, who do we call for help?
Well, the first people you should call are your friends and your neighbors, and get yourself together in a study group, because there is going to be a lot of reform that's necessary. And this reform is going to come from the grassroots up. There's not going to be anybody that's going to come and tell you what it is that you need to do. So you have got to get yourself up to speed, and all of the different things where you've been leaving it up to the experts, you're the expert. And so you've got to get yourself ready to make decisions about what it is that you want. And the very first thing that we're going to do in the United States is we're going to take back our real Constitution, so we have a platform and we don't have to rush to do anything else. We'll just take back our original Constitution, and then we will take our time to figure out what it is that needs to change, or leave it the way it is. But everybody is in the driver's seat right now. That's the situation.
Do you think it would be prudent for people to purchase within their means gold and silver?
Absolutely, but you would do this not as an investment, because there is a lot of gold and silver. It's not going to go rushing out on the markets. It's going to be used for replacing your paper currency. But there's a transition period, and we don't know exactly how smooth the transition is going to be.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Karen, I can't thank you enough. This has been a wonderful time spent. Like I said, folks, she came up on a day that we were expecting a major snowstorm. She's a very bright person. I hope that maybe we could do this again to get an update in the future. And for those who heard, okay, this is an insider's view as to what has been going on. So when you ask yourself, what's going on in our country? Why are we trillions in debt? What happened to the middle class? It was done by design, corruption that she is overturning.